Picture this. You wake up one morning, take a deep breath and step outside, only to find that the oceans, the vast, mysterious blue expanse that covers most of our planet, have transformed overnight. Gone is the familiar saltwater, the waves crashing against the shore, the cool breeze carrying that oceanic scent. In its place, a steaming, bubbling soup, like a colossal pot of stew, stretching as far as the eye can see. And not just any soup, mind you, but the kind that makes you wonder if you're in some sort of wild post-apocalyptic food commercial. Welcome to the new reality of Earth, where our oceans are no longer made of water but of soup. At first, people would probably think it's some sort of elaborate prank. Did someone dump a giant kettle of soup into the ocean? People would joke nervously. But no, it's real. The soup is everywhere. The salty taste we once knew is now replaced by something a little more chunky. And immediately we realize we've got a problem on our hands. How do you live on a planet where the very thing that made up 71% of its surface is now the world's largest and most unpredictable soup bowl? Let's break it down. First off, the immediate effects are clear. All of our ships gone. They can't float in soup, folks. And we're not talking about some light bisque. Imagine the consistency of the ocean turning into something like a thick, hearty vegetable soup or a stew with chunks of, well, whatever's floating in there. Not only would boats and ships sink like they're in quicksand, but swimming? Forget it. You'd be swimming through clumps of carrots, potatoes, or whatever weird ingredients have now been stirred into the mix. Forget trying to navigate anywhere. It's like being stuck in a never-ending cooking show challenge, but with no judges and a much higher chance of drowning in hot broth. So what about marine life? Your beloved fish, dolphins, and whales are all scrambling. Fish aren't made to breathe in a liquid stew. Sea turtles would be trying to surf on chunks of celery, while seahorses desperately try to grab onto floating noodles. Honestly, it's chaos. The entire ecosystem would need to adapt to this new, soupy environment, and that's not going to be pretty. Marine life might end up evolving in some weird ways, but the ocean would be one giant mess. Maybe we'd see new types of creatures, soup-dwelling animals with thick, broth-resistant skins, like giant shrimp with reinforced exoskeletons or octopuses with ladles instead of tentacles. It's an aquatic post-apocalyptic food chain, and it's weirdly fascinating. Okay, but what about us, the humans? How do we deal with a world where the oceans are now a giant soup pot? We need to think about the basics: water, food, and transportation. Well, good news. We have an unlimited supply of liquid in the form of soup, but it's not exactly drinkable. No one's going to be happily sipping from the soup sea without some serious consequences. It's going to take some very creative thinking to figure out how to desalinate, filter, and purify this broth into something usable. We could maybe use soup as a resource for the world's largest culinary experiment, soup distillation to extract drinkable liquids, but that's going to take more than a couple of soup spoons. This is a full-on global operation. And then there's food. Soup could be a valuable resource, right? I mean, think of all the ingredients just floating out there: vegetables, meats, noodles, random chunks of who knows what. We could harvest the ocean for all kinds of soup-based meals. We'd likely set up massive floating soup factories to collect, filter, and prepare the best possible broth. Fresh fish stew would become the new normal, as people paddle out in boats made of giant soup ladles to collect ingredients. But with the fish gone and the sea creatures scrambling for survival, our soup sources might dwindle quickly. And with soup everywhere, you can bet soup-based economies would flourish. Countries that can make the best and most efficient soup might dominate the global food market. But don't get too comfortable. One of the biggest issues we'd face in this new soupy world would be the temperature. Oceans aren't exactly warm, but now that they're soup, the temperature would fluctuate based on the thickness and heat of the broth. You'd get scorching hot pockets of liquid that could scald you if you ventured too far. Or you'd find ice-cold chunks floating around like soup that's been sitting in the fridge too long. So not only would you need to figure out how to harvest this soup safely, but you'd also need specialized gear to survive. Imagine a world where soup-proof wetsuits become as common as scuba gear. Everyone's walking around in protective layers, carrying giant straws or ladles to scoop up the most useful soup ingredients. Talk about a wild new fashion statement. The impact on global travel would be significant, too. All those fancy airplanes and boats? They're grounded. Instead, we'd have to develop soup-friendly transportation, floating soup rafts, soup-powered jets, maybe even giant noodles to ride on. Ocean travel would be redefined. It might take a while to figure out how to move from continent to continent in a soup-filled world, but who doesn't want to ride a giant dumpling across the Atlantic? The possibilities for innovation are endless, as long as we can all stomach the idea of living in a world where soup is both the environment and the sustenance. On a societal level, we'd have to adjust our whole culture. Gone are the days of beach vacations, surfing competitions, and underwater diving tours. Instead, we might see soup festivals. Instead of surfing competitions, we'd have noodle sliding races. Popular tourist destinations would turn into floating soup resorts, where you can just hang out and splash in the soup, provided you're not too overwhelmed by the smell. The world would be obsessed with soup recipes. Imagine a new form of social media. #SoupTalk, where everyone shares their latest soup experiments. Hashtags like #BrothLife or #SoupGoals would dominate, and new soup influencers would emerge, showing us the best ways to transform our daily soup into something gourmet. And the world's greatest minds? They'd be in a race against time to figure out how to make this work. Engineers would design soup filtration systems, agriculturalists would find ways to farm on floating soup platforms, and biologists would be scrambling to figure out how humans can live in a world that's part kitchen, part water park, and part science experiment. Science would evolve in strange ways as we start to treat the soup as both a food and an ecosystem. In the end, surviving would mean adapting, becoming soup experts in a world where broth reigns supreme. So what happens if Earth's oceans suddenly turn into a giant soup? Chaos, innovation, weird new creatures, and a whole lot of soup-based ingenuity. The world would become a giant, living, boiling cauldron of possibility, and humanity would have to figure out how to thrive in a world that went from paradise to an endless food fight in a matter of hours. It's not the apocalypse you expected, but maybe it's the one you never knew you needed. What would you do in this new soupy reality? Think about it, and let us know your wildest soup survival strategies in the comments. After all, the future of the world might just depend on who can make the best chowder.